Dr. Horst Treiblmaier is a full professor and head of the Department of International Management at Module University Vienna. Previously, he was a visiting professor at Purdue University, UCLA, and UBC. He participated in various EU programs and worked for the European technology platform ALICE. He has authored and edited books on technological transformation and published more than 150 articles in leading academic journals and conference proceedings. He is a research associate at the UCL Center for Blockchain Technologies and an affiliated member of the Academic Faculty Network at the Blockchain Center of Excellence at the University of Arkansas.
Hello, Professor Saini, can you see me?
Yes.
Yeah, now I can share my screen. Just give me a second. So here we are. Can you see my screen?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the conference so far. I enjoyed it a lot, lots of useful insights and food for thought. So can you also see my mouse pointer moving me around?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I can use the mouse pointer to highlight something. That's good. Yeah, my name is Horst Treiblmaier from Vienna, and you can see the university on this picture there. Right now, I'm not here. I'm working in my home office as mostly in the last 2 years. And I'm also talking about Bitcoin's energy consumption. And actually, this is something I never wanted to touch because my feeling is there's already so much published outside. But I find there's a lot of confusion always, and I'm getting feedback from so-called top channels in the field, and they're rejecting papers of mine because blockchain uses too much energy, and I got funding applications rejected. So I thought I'm going to sit down, and I'm writing a paper about this, and I've been doing this for the last half year, so it's almost finished, and this is just a tiny glimpse. So if something's wrong, please let me know, but it could also be the case that I just don't have enough time to tell you everything about it. And I just wanted to open the discourse with something that I find very interesting. If we look at the full range of opinions on the topic, and I'm talking about Bitcoin and energy consumption, because for me, blockchain is much too broad. We have so many different blockchain solutions out there. It's much like comparing apples and oranges because we have those different consensus mechanisms. So when it comes to Bitcoin, you have some people saying Bitcoin is an absolute disaster, and others are saying Bitcoin is not that bad. And that's what you usually would expect from a debate where you have something that's kind of detrimental. And some people are saying it's really bad. Others are saying, oh, it's not that bad. But with Bitcoin, it's kind of weird because you have other opinions out there. Smart people saying this. Bitcoin does not have much of an impact. And you even have opinions saying Bitcoin is good for the environment. And that what makes the whole discussion so kind of interesting for me, but also kind of confusing. And what I'm doing in my paper, I'm collecting different opinions, but I'm also adding my 2 cents or my 2 Satoshis, as we have already heard it before today. And I just wanted to open the discussion with an academic approach. Very often you hear the statement Bitcoin wastes energy, but of course it's very normative. So even better would be that saying Bitcoin consumes energy. But then if we are really picky and thinking about the law of thermodynamics, then energy is not being consumed. It stays in the system. It just moves, or it's being transformed from electricity to heat, which could be an important factor if we consider externalities, because this heat, as we have already heard about it today, can be bad for the environment, but you can also use it for heating something, and that would be good. So to be more specific, Bitcoin uses energy. And the funny part is, or electricity, to be very specific. In the whole discussion so far, at least as I'm aware of, nobody has asked the question, what is Bitcoin? And you might say, oh, wait a second, this is a very academic discussion. This is boring, but I think it's important that we ask this question. So I want to talk about understanding Bitcoin, and then I'm showing you some arguments in favor of Bitcoin and some arguments against Bitcoin's energy consumption. And then finally, I'm showing you a roadmap or a framework that I created, and that can be used to make the discussion a little bit more objective. At least I think so. So what's the nature of Bitcoin? Basically, there are more options available, but for me, it could either be a protocol. That would be my first choice. So the 9 pages that were published by Satoshi in 2008. So basically the rules of a distributed ledger, a data structure. It could be the network of the nodes sending this information around, or most people most likely think about a cryptocurrency. But in neither of these cases, it's actually the protocol network or the cryptocurrency that consumes energy. That's an anthropomorphism. Actually, who makes the decisions to consume energy? It's the miners, because they want to gain some rewards. So I would say it's a little bit like saying it's my car that consumes the energy, or it's my private jet, if you like, but it's not me. No, I'm not consuming energy, that's the car. And why is this important? Because nobody's forcing the miners to mine Bitcoin. You know, and as you will see later on, I think the network is a bit oversecured, or I assume so. So it's a conscious decision, and it makes all of a difference because the miners themselves can decide what kind of energy they are going to use. And what's the goal of Bitcoin? We talked about it a little bit today in the other presentations, and of course it depends on your view. Is it a speculative asset, something that can be used only for money laundering or for buying drugs online? Is it a currency? Is it a money? And depending on how you perceive Bitcoin, then you will also see the energy use. And we also heard in previous discussions about how consensus can be reached in distributed networks. And Bitcoin is actually not using proof of work consensus, but Nakamoto consensus, and proof of work is just a part of Nakamoto. But we also need elliptic curve cryptography and other things. But there are different ways of reaching consensus. In a previous discussion, we heard about Byzantine fault tolerance, and Bitcoin is just a probabilistic solution to Byzantine fault tolerance. We have other solutions, proof of stake, proof of authority, and so on. And we have also heard this with Solana. But the point here is every one of these solutions is conceptually different. That's why Bitcoin has not switched to proof of stake so far, and most likely it will never do so. Bitcoin mining is just a process to ensure network security. That's basically the side effect. That's the goal of Bitcoin mining, to create secure networks, to make sure that on average, every 10 minutes, a new block is being added. If the network gets more competitive, then mining becomes more expensive. And if there's less mining power, then it's getting a little bit easier. The goal is only every 10 minutes, there should be a new block. So what's the connection between Bitcoin and energy? Depending on how you see it, it could be a process transferring energy into something of value, currency, money, or of course, if you see it in a negative manner, then it's just a waste of energy. But it's important for me to first clarify what are we talking about, and then we can see how the energy is being used. So my definition, or my description, if you like, would be that the protocol Bitcoin provides a game theoretic incentive that is paid out using the Bitcoin network, where all the nodes communicate in Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency. And this protocol is an incentive, or provides an incentive for miners to invest money in buying the equipment and running the machinery. And so that's all about it. And this, very often I find that in the literature, and especially in the public media, the very basics are not really that clear. And so here I have a couple of misconceptions, and I would assume that in this audience, I can make it very quick. Of course, the first one, Bitcoin is blockchain, and you can see the statements, blockchain uses so much energy. And again, I told in the beginning, I got a funding application rejected because blockchain is using so much energy. In fact, it was a permissioned private blockchain, so we didn't have any proof of work consensus, but the reviewers just didn't get it. Another thing is that the Bitcoin protocol is also not immutable. I mean, the implementation, the Bitcoin core client, if you like, but most likely Bitcoin is never going to switch to proof of stake or something else, because I would assume that the majority of the community will stay with proof of work, but it would be possible. And of course, proof of work is not an essential component of all cryptocurrencies. And so energy consumption is not a feature of blockchain. And all those statements are basically misconceptions, because most likely the authors do not fully get how Bitcoin works. And also a statement in the upper right, you will see from the World Economic Forum, which was predicting in 2017 that by 2020, Bitcoin is going to consume all the energy of the world, which of course did not happen, because what they did, they just extrapolated an exponential growth, which never happens. But there's so much confusion out there, and it's important to clarify that first. And I have to point out, I'm not a Bitcoin maximalist. So in my paper, I'm listing the positive and the negative aspects also. And the first thing I'm starting with, and it's pretty straightforward, I'm just listing sources that are predicting Bitcoin's energy consumption. And I can make this pretty short because we talked about it already today. So here you have a couple of estimations. And let me put this into perspective. So let's take the biggest number here. And interestingly, the highest number for the energy consumption comes from the Bitcoin Mining Council, which is an association of Bitcoin miners. But if we go to the upper limit, saying Bitcoin is using 220 terawatt hours a year, and I took the numbers from 2019 that I found in Statista, that would mean it's 0.9% of the world's energy consumption. And again, that's an upper number. I found other numbers saying 0.05 or 0.1%. And is that a lot? Of course, it all depends. If you think that Bitcoin could be a solution for financial inclusion or could replace the current banking system with something that's more efficient, it's not that much. But if you think Bitcoin is just a nuisance and completely useless, then it's a whole lot amount of energy that's being wasted or used. And today we also heard that Bitcoin is using a lot of fossil fuels. Actually, that's a number that I found from a 2020 study from the University of Cambridge, and they were already pointing out that in fact, Bitcoin is using a lot of renewables, which is kind of interesting. And again, it's the miner's decision what kind of energy they're using, because nobody's forcing them to mine in the first place. Yeah, so far everything has been discussed in the media, but there's one question I think nobody has asked before. Please correct me if I'm wrong. And the question is, how much energy would we need to secure the network? Of course, it's more like an academic question because everything is driven by supply and demand, which means that Bitcoin miners are going to invest money as long as the mining process is beneficial for them. So the marginal costs of mining roughly equal the marginal costs of, or the marginal profits they get. But how much security would we need for Bitcoin in the first place? Do we have a network that's so secure? And I think that would be a good question for academic publications. And we can split it up a little bit. How can you attack Bitcoin in the first place? So basically, if you want to conduct a 51% attack, meaning taking over part of the network, then you can either do it by creating a physical hash rate, by buying this mining equipment, those ASICs, or a synthetic hash rate, buying. That means you take over some kind of mining pools. Let's stay with the first one. And the question is, what can be gained from such an attack? So many people think you can attack the Bitcoin network and then you can steal the Bitcoins. It doesn't work like that because you cannot break the cryptography. That would be something different. So basically what you can do, you can destroy the network. You can mine empty blocks, or you can do a deep reorganization attack, basically create some kind of fork or do some double spending, but not way back into history. And so the gain is not that high, basically, and it would be hard to justify for a state organization to invest so much money to attack Bitcoin or just to destroy it. And how much did it cost? I found a number from the brains, and they calculated in 2021, attacking Bitcoin would require hardware equipment that cost you $5.5 billion US for a attack on the physical hash rate. So Bitcoin is very secure. And I think it would be a nice research proposition to use different scenarios and to figure out how big is the incentive for various stakeholders to attack Bitcoin in the first place. Yeah, then let's move on with the list of positive effects. And this is not everything that I found. I needed to shorten it for this presentation. And we already had some of these arguments. So in the first place, if I'm studying here, why could Bitcoin be positive for the environment? Yeah, if you're really a maximalist and think Bitcoin can replace the current financial system or banking system, then you can compare Bitcoin with the banking system and say, oh, it's way more efficient. We are not there yet. I'm not saying we are getting there. It's just an argument that I found in the literature. The second one is a very prominent one. saying Bitcoin is basically incentivizing and enabling renewable energy sources. And one of these authors, Cedar Santner et al., they created something that's called the green energy theory or green Bitcoin theory, saying Bitcoin is fostering renewables, so it's good for the environment. Of course, you also find counter arguments saying that you could use this kind of energy for other purposes. And of course, we have examples of energy that would otherwise be wasted. We already had it also today in one of the discussions. So if you have some kind of gas that needs to be flared, it's better to use it and mine Bitcoin than just to let it emit in the atmosphere. And other interesting ideas I found in the literature, you can use Bitcoin to benefit the grid because it's flexible. So if you have a huge energy demand, then you turn off your mining equipment and use the energy for something that's more important. And if you have energy you cannot use at specific times of the day or the year, you can use it for Bitcoin mining. Of course, this only works if the miners are also participating. And I found a paper that was claiming that if you have Bitcoin in a portfolio, in a financial portfolio, it can be good for the total carbon emissions of your portfolio. And yeah, I just want to point out the final point here from Andreas Antonopoulos, and I think that's a clever argument. He says it's good to have many miners in a place like we have now with those huge mining pools, because if you need to do some regulation or taxation, you know where to find them. They're easy to spot. It's not like a distributed system that's all over the place. You have everything you need to target in one place, and that makes it easier. Of course, there are many, of course, my research propositions would be to investigate each of these arguments in a rigorous manner. And on the other hand, of course, we have all these negative effects, and quite understandable, we have the huge carbon footprint and the lack of renewable energy that we already mentioned today in one of the first presentations. And there are even some cases that fossil fuel power plants have been reactivated because all of a sudden it became profitable again to use them for Bitcoin mining. And apart from using the energy, there's also an issue with e-waste, because those ASICs that are produced for Bitcoin mining, they can only be used for mining and nothing else. So it's a highly specialized hardware equipment only for Bitcoin. And there's some case studies, and I have one here. I think we also heard about something like that today in the lake. So they were using the water for cooling the equipment and putting it back in the lake, and that affected wildlife. So you have all these stories out there. And other examples would be that the Bitcoin demand caused a shortage in chips because those chips were used for Bitcoin mining equipment and not, let's say, for laptops or computers. And finally, we heard some examples also today of local power outages and shortages, because especially in developing countries where the grid is not that robust, if it's profitable to mine Bitcoin, then miners are doing that and can lead to power outages. So my research propositions would be to look at all these and many more and investigate them in a serious manner, because normally the discussion stops at the level of pointing out these cases, but I'm missing some kind of more objective assessment. So let me present you on my second but last slide the framework that I have in mind. And of course, we need to start with Bitcoin. And before we start any discussion, we need to make it clear what we see in Bitcoin. So is it a medium of exchange or is it a store of value? Of course, it could also be the other way around, that you're saying, I don't think anything of Bitcoin, but those are two functions that it could potentially fulfill. I think it was planned as a medium of exchange, but it became like a store of value, and that's how it is at the moment. But the most important point in this framework is that we should also take into account its future potential. So Bitcoin was first implemented in January 2009, but it got into public attention in, I don't know, 2015 or something like that. And it didn't, of course, have much governmental support except from El Salvador or the Central African Republic, but most governments or central banks don't like it. So basically, we are not there yet, or potentially. So nobody knows what's going to be, but we should take into account that we could have some more positive effects just by using Bitcoin. And on the other hand, we have, let's say, traditional payment systems, or if you're an optimist, the banking system, most likely not centralized finance. That might be too big, but it's always important to make it clear what are the opponents, if you like, or what kind of entities we are comparing. And so we need to take into account what kind of energy or how much energy goes into Bitcoin for its operation, but also the production of the hardware, the facilities, cooling, human resources, and other factors that I've forgotten here. Because very often I see in discussions that people are complaining that somebody is comparing apples and oranges, and in fact, they are missing something out. But the same thing on the other side. So I'm not going through these bullet points, but it's very important. If we compare Bitcoin with a settlement system, it's not only fair to compare the transactions, but you need to take into account all the energy for all the background operations. And then we need to make it clear what the issue is. Energy is not so much the issue. It could be electricity, but in most cases, we're talking about CO2 emissions. That's the real main culprit we are interested in. And the core issue is there could also be other factors, but CO2 most likely is the most important discussion point at the moment. But there could also be side effects. And I'm listing them in the papers, not today in the presentation, positive and negative ones. And now we have a complete framework. And I think if researchers, academic researchers would go forward and try to be as objective as possible and list all these factors, then we can have a much more informed discussion. And so let me end my presentation with my core issues. First of all, again, Bitcoin and blockchain, they are different. There's so many different blockchain versions out there that we need to be careful not to compare apples and oranges. And that's why I'm focusing on Bitcoin proof of work. And it's an emotionally charged topic because there's hardly anyone out there who doesn't have any kind of interest in Bitcoin. Either you are invested in it or you hate it because you're a central banker or something like that. And so there are different hidden agendas. And it's always crucial to make this clear in any kind of public discussion, what you're standing for and what your view on Bitcoin is. And you also need to take into account what Bitcoin could possibly get into. Also what it might look like in the future, because we also have the option of second layer and Lightning, and let's see if it comes in the future. And so I hope that my framework in the paper that I'm going to publish in a couple of weeks from now, hopefully, will help researchers for getting such a discussion started. And if you want to reach out to me, here you have my contact details, and I would also be happy to share my paper with you as soon as I've got it ready. Thank you very much for having me, and I would be happy to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Professor Treiblmaier, for your interesting presentation.